Hey folks, thanks for stopping by. Welcome back to my YouTube channel Czechoslovak Gun Stories. I'm Kuba and today we are gonna have a look at CZ50. So before we start with the history lesson, I would like to mention a couple of things related to this gun and its status on the Czech gun market these days. So CZ50 is probably the cheapest gun on the Czech market in terms of let's say a carry gun. If you want to have a carry gun and you are on a budget, this is the gun to go. It's actually a good quality gun, and if you are careful and pick up a gun that is, well, let's say in a good condition, then you have a gun that you can carry on a daily basis just fine. To be more concrete, let's have a look at the gun I have on the table here. This is my CZ50. It was safety checked prior. We'll start with the video, but just to make sure. This is my CZ50. I bought this one with one magazine for 1500 Czech crowns, and that's probably the top price I would pay for this gun. If it's in a great condition, if it's with a very well functioning magazine, and if it doesn't have any wear and tear, and if internally the gun is in good condition, if the magazine works fine, then there is no reason not to pick it up. 1500 crowns is the top price I would pay for a really nice early CZ50, but the price for a good one, let's say, or very good one status, could be around 1000 to 1500 Czech crowns. 1000, that's like the ordinary CZ50 from 1960s, and CZ70s, which for me are a little less interesting than CZ50s, although they are actually working just fine as well. As I said, the price in a local gun shop can be around about 1000 to 1500 Czech crowns. They're like what, $40 to $60 for a carry gun. I believe that's a good deal. Of course, you can buy a little less expensive guns for like 800, 600, but these are usually really beat up. So yeah, this is really a budget-friendly carry gun. It's reliable if you keep it in good condition. We'll discuss this later. But obviously, that's the most budget-friendly carry firearm that you can buy on the Czech market. Another very, very important benefit of this gun is that the spare parts are available generally. They are quite cheap. And another advantage is that this gun is very well known by the Czech gunsmiths. So any issue you might have, any, let's say, improvement you would like to be made to this gun, any gunsmith will help, because they have great experience with servicing these guns since early 1990s when they came to the public market. So it's a good deal. Now, for the history of this gun, CZ50 is actually a police gun. It's not a military firearm. It has never been accepted to the military service. It was always in the service of the police. In the service, CZ50 replaced the very well-known CZ27 and also CZ24. These two guns were designed in very early 1920s in the factory in Strakonice, and were in service of both military and police. In case of police, they were in service with both police and gendarmerie. Well, the problem with the CZ27 and 24 in the 1950s, or actually late 1940s, early 1950s, was that it was not modern. It was quite outdated. Some of the things like single action trigger, very, very strange and not really effective safety, and the fact that the gun internally is very, very complicated compared to CZ50, and since the manufacturing was itself very expensive, after the World War II, the Czech Ministry of Internal Affairs released a request for proposal for a new service handgun for the police, which stated directly that the gun should take as much as possible from the German Walter PP/PPK. And the design that won the competition in 1947-1948 was the design by the two brothers, very famous Czech designers that already had some of their designs accepted by the Czechoslovak armed forces. Two brothers, Jan and Jaroslav Kratochvíl. These two brothers were employed in Česká zbrojovka Strakonice, where they created this pistol, apart from other designs. But before this was accepted to service, there were a couple of prototypes. The first prototype that you can see here, that first prototype was, in terms of size, much closer to Walther PPK rather than Walther PP. And you can notice probably that it had an extraordinarily big magazine release button. That's because the magazine release button was also a way to disassemble the gun completely. So if you push the magazine release button and pull the slide back and up, you're able to disassemble the gun. This was in the end not used on the final concept of the firearm, which you can see on the second prototype. The second prototype was very, very close to a serial production CZ50. The production began in 1950 in the factory in Strakonice, where it was also designed. However, this factory had one big problem. It was way too close to German borders, and I mean at that time West German borders. And we were already, as you may know, under the communist control. So Moscow decided and we had to follow. So the production only lasted 3 years in Strakonice, and then in 1953 it was moved to Uherský Brod. Uherský Brod is the famous factory, you know, for producing all the beautiful stuff that we love these days, like CZ75s, CZP10Cs, Scorpion Evo 3s, Brand 2s, Brand 1s, but also VZ58, Scorpion VZ61 submachine gun, and many others. So this factory had a capacity to produce the pistols. However, it didn't have the experience, and that was a problem. You have to realize that the factory in Strakonice was producing pistols since the very beginning of the existence of the Czechoslovakia, so from very early 1920s. And in late 1940s, they had a very, very huge experience with producing pistols, unlike the factory in Uherský Brod. So, in general, the guns that were produced in Strakonice are of slightly better quality in terms of fit and finish, and also materials, as well as internally you can see that the guns are simply cleaner, there are less tooling marks, and generally if you are about to pick one for yourself, then I really suggest you have a look first at the guns that were produced in Strakonice. So the production in Strakonice, as I said, lasted until 1953, and they produced only 88,826 guns before the production was moved to Uherský Brod. The problem with the production in Uherský Brod was that not only they lacked the proper experience with pistols. At that time they were producing mainly heavy machine guns, flare guns, and some sporting or hunting firearms in small numbers, but not pistols. And pistols are completely different type of product than heavy machine gun. So, well, before the workers in Uherský Brod got their experience, the guns are not really, in terms of quality, a good match for the guns that were produced in Strakonice. Another problem was that the documentation, the tooling, and also the machines that were sent from Strakonice to Uherský Brod was just incomplete. And so the production only started in 1956 in Uherský Brod. And until the end of the production in Uherský Brod, they created 260,000 pistols. And then they went on to produce the updated or facelifted version of CZ50. I sometimes say it was rather downgraded than upgraded. CZ70. and they created over 700,000 CZ70s there, which makes in total close to 1 million or maybe slightly over 1 million of CZ50s and CZ70s produced, which means that they are quite cheap and quite easily available on the Czech market. However, if you are about to pick one, then again I suggest you first have a look at the Strakonice guns, because they were produced in much smaller numbers. So from collector's perspective, they are more interesting, and from the quality perspective, they are also slightly better than the guns from Uherský Brod. One interesting thing about the production in Strakonice, the CZ50 serial numbers started with 650,000. That's because they were in production along with the CZ27, and they wanted to just continue in the series or the serial number range from CZ27. And well, since they were actually in production next to each other for a short period of time, so you may have CZ27 that is actually younger than your CZ50. The last CZ27 had a serial number something around 627,000, and then CZ50 serial number range starts with 650,000. The important thing is that this serial number range was only applied to guns that were produced in Strakonice. So in the guns that are produced in Strakonice, and now I speak only for CZ50s, had a serial number with a range beginning with 650,000, and the serial numbers were like 6 digits. So if you have CZ50 with 6-digit serial number, it's obvious that this is a gun that was produced in Strakonice. When it was moved to Uherský Brod and the production started in 1956, they changed the serial number, and now it was 1 letter plus 5 numbers. Later on, when the CZ70 came into the production, they went back to 6-digit serial numbers starting with 100,000, but obviously all the CZ70s were already produced in Uherský Brod. What's also very interesting in terms of quality of the production, I mentioned that the CZ50s from Strakonice were of the best quality. Then the quality slightly decreased with the start of the production of CZ50s in Uherský Brod. I mentioned that it was not only based on the experience of the workers in Uherský Brod that lacked the experience with pistols. It was also because of the incomplete documentation and tooling. However, one more thing that I understand as a reason for a little, let's say, worse quality of the guns that were produced in Uherský Brod was the fact that in Strakonice the pistols were actually the main article, the main product, whereas in Uherský Brod pistols were just only part of the whole program. And in 1950s, the factory in Uherský Brod was already producing submachine guns for the army, rifles, sporting hunting rifles, even sniper rifles. So there was a huge amount of other products that were produced there, and also the factory in Uherský Brod was deeply into development. So they had like a couple of branches where they were working on improvements of the existing firearms and also on new designs. So as obvious, CZ50 as such, as just a part of the program, didn't get that much attention as it get in Strakonice. In 1970s, after the production of CZ70 started, the ministry actually started an investigation on the quality of the CZ70 because they were not satisfied, and they got many reports, many information or feedback from the various police forces that CZ70 is not in terms of quality what they expected. And that's very interesting because in the communist industry, or in the state-controlled industry, which we had here in 1970s, obviously, for the whole existence of Czechoslovakia between 1948 and 1989, the industry was under control of the Communist Party. And it was not very common that they were openly criticizing the quality of the production. However, they did in this case, and there were some improvements made to CZ70 in terms of quality and materials. However, still the quality was not as good as it was in Strakonice. As for the markings of the CZ50s and CZ70s, let's start with the Strakonice production. The Strakonice production had a marking on the left side of the slide, and it says Česká zbrojovka, Národní podnik Strakonice. And then you have the Česká zbrojovka logo and the 7.65, that's how we call a 32 ACP caliber in Europe. Later in the production, just very slightly before the production was moved to Uherský Brod, the markings were changed and it only said Česká zbrojovka Praha, made in Czechoslovakia, and 765 obviously. As for the serial number, it's on the right side of the slide over here and also on the barrel. And for the Strakonice production, there is one more thing, or one more marking that you can find on the gun, and it's here on the grip, and it says NB and 50, 51 or 52. Not sure if also 53, because in 1953 there was just a very small amount of guns made. What it stands for actually is NB, Národní bezpečnost, translated to English it's like national security. That's how the police was called in 1950s, and 50 means the year when it was the particular piece was accepted to service. So this one was accepted into service in 1950, and it's one of the first 11,000 guns produced. So that's for the markings in Strakonice. Then in Uherský Brod, for very brief moment at the very beginning of the production, they were marked Česká zbrojovka Praha, made in Czechoslovakia, as I mentioned, with the very last guns from Strakonice. Then it changed to Vzor 50 Cal 765, made in Czechoslovakia. The serial number was once again on the right side and on the barrel, but the NB marking was not there here anymore, so you won't find it on the guns that were produced in Uherský Brod. Then CZ70 had the similar markings to CZ50. It only said Vzor 70 Cal 765, made in Czechoslovakia, and then the serial number was on the same places. So that's briefly for the history of the production of CZ50. Let me take the camera closer so that we can have a look at the details. CZ50 had three components that were protected by patent. First one was the loaded chamber indicator that is connected to the extractor. So once there's a round in the chamber, the extractor will get pushed out a little bit, which pushes it in on the other end. And the pin is then visible on the left side of the gun. It's easy to check it with your finger. Also, when you aim the gun, you can see it in your line of view that there's a round in the chamber. It's a pretty reliable solution, I would say, very simple. So it was protected by a patent. Another solution protected by a patent is the safety and the cocker lever, which is not on the slide but on the frame compared to Walther PP. I'll leave it up to you what's the better way for you. I think I prefer it on the frame. So this was also protected by a patent, and then the third part that was protected by a Czechoslovak patent was from an internal perspective this firing pin safety. And the firing pin safety itself is very simple, very cost effective, yet it is very reliable and easy to maintain. As for the design changes and improvement attempts, there were plenty of them and all were developed in the Uherský Brod factory. The first attempt in 1950s was related to the double action trigger. CZ50, just like its Eastern Bloc contemporaries based on Walter PP design, guns like Soviet PM Makarov, Polish P64 Radom, its successor P83 Vanet, or Hungarian FAG, all had a very stiff double action trigger. This has a reason behind it, and that was to prevent an unintentional discharge, but the double action was far more stiff than necessary. To fix this, the factory asked the respected designer František Koucký. His name may not tell you that much, but he was, among other designs, responsible for our beloved CZ75, which he created later. Mr. Koucký analyzed the trigger system, but found out that any significant improvement would need a substantial redesign of the trigger mechanism, which was rejected by the factory as it would complicate the production at that time, and also it would make the production more expensive. Another attempts were related to the frame of the pistol. In late 1960s, the factory redesigned the frame to be made from the light aluminum alloy. Unfortunately, in 1967, the price of aluminum skyrocketed and got 70% more expensive, which buried this version due to extensive production costs. One more improvement that made it to the serial production was the innovative process of producing the ordinary metal frame itself. Instead of milling from the big chunk of steel, the frame was, since 1968, casted, and the rough casting was then milled into the precise specs. That reduced a lot of time and costs. This is probably the reason why there were so many CZ70s compared to CZ50s. This process made the production so much more efficient that the factory was able to multiply the quantity of guns manufactured. Two more attempts were related to the caliber of the pistol. Firstly, the gun was rebuilt to 9mm Browning, which is the European designation for 380 ACP. This project was stopped even though the prototype was ready for serial production. The reason was that during 1960s and 1970s, the 9mm Luger was becoming more and more dominant cartridge for all Western armed forces, and there was no interest anymore in 9mm Browning. Similar situation was with the so-called Projekt Brak, that means in English Project Slingshot, which was a code name for a rebuild of CZ50 to use a 9mm Makarov cartridge. At that time, Soviet Union was already using this cartridge, whereas the Czechoslovak army was still stuck with the VZ52 pistol in 7.62 Tokarev. However, in the end, the army preferred the brand new design later known as VZ82 pistol, so the 9mm Makarov CZ50 never made it beyond the prototype neither. Regarding size, there was also a concept of a compact version of CZ50, known later as CZ80. This gun had a standard VZ50 grip and magazine, however the barrel and slide were shortened for better concealability. This version, once again, never made it to serial production. One last interesting version is a CZ50 rebuilt to serve as a target gun, especially for so-called Svazarm. That was an organization for youth that was based on the cooperation with the Communist Party and the Czechoslovak army. This version had a longer barrel and both front and rear sights were rebuilt to improve the accuracy. These are very rare collectibles in the Czech Republic these days. So this is it for the variants of CZ50. Unfortunately, most of them never made it to the serial production. One design flaw that the gun has is with the firing pin itself. On Walter PP, maybe you noticed that the firing pin is under spring tension. Not in case of CZ50. Over here the firing pin is free floating. So An important information for all you who dry fire the gun: don't do it ever, because you will break the firing pin, and that's very common thing to happen. Actually, the firing pins are still available on the Czech market. They cost like 150 Czech crowns, so they are very cheap. If you still need to dry fire it, what we do is that we put a piece of rubber here so that the hammer will not hit the firing pin that hard, and so that just limits the impact and will protect your firing pin. Or use a dummy round maybe, but yeah, I don't dry fire this gun at all. That's the best way you can protect your firing pin. So that's one design flaw of the pistol. Another design flaw, and that's a very important information for all of you who are about to get your CZ50. How do you find out if the gun was shot a lot? If it was in like more extensive use? In its service, the gun was not used all that much. Well, the police officers were not at the range every day. They a couple of times per year, maybe, if that. Well, so they didn't see all that much action throughout their service time. Some of them were even just lying in a crate in the police warehouses. But if the gun was shot a lot, you can simply find out if you check the area around the firing pin safety. Sorry. So if you check the area around the firing pin safety, it should be flush. If there are any grooves, any flattened spots, or you can see it here that it doesn't have that problem, but some guns will have grooves over here, or some spots that are not straight, but they are like flattened. That's because there's a design flaw with the hammer. Let me just gun back together, and I'll show you. When the slide goes back, it tends to hit the hammer slightly, which then goes back with its own weight, and then hits the slide back, which happens around the area where the firing pin is, and it actually causes the groove or the damage in this area. Well, if the gun was not shot a lot, then you will have it nice and straight over here, nice and flush. But if you see grooves or flattened spots here, you can see there's just very little here on my pistol. If you don't see any damage there, then you can be sure that the gun was not shot a lot. Well, this damage is not that big of a deal. Actually, you have to be only careful that it doesn't protrude into the channel for firing pin safety, because if it does, then it means that it will either limit the travel of the firing pin safety, making the gun not drop safe in the worst case, and also it means that it will not move smoothly, which means that your trigger pull will be rather mushy and maybe hard and so on. So yeah, so always make sure that the channel for the firing pin is clean, there are no obstructions there, and that the firing pin moves freely. It should be really stiff. It is stiff, but it should be able to move smoothly. So that's another design flaw of CZ50. The biggest problem, however, was with the magazine. The magazine is really the most common problems if you have, especially if you have failures to feed. This magazine is from CZ70 actually. You can distinguish it by the pinky extension, as I mentioned. If you don't have a pinky extension on your gun, that means that since it was very brittle, it got chipped off at some point. Also, how to identify the CZ70 magazine: it has one more hole that is offset from the rest of the holes. A CZ50 magazine will have only 7 holes, even though it still takes 8 rounds. Some CZ70 magazines can even take 9. Please don't do that. Don't even put 8 rounds in the chamber. Don't put the full capacity unless you will shoot it instantly. But if you decide to carry the gun, please only carry it with 7 rounds in the chamber. Don't put the 8th round in the chamber. Why? Because the fin lips will bend out and they will cause the malfunction. That's actually the reason why these guns may suffer from failures to feed, and it happens all the time. The feed lips get bent out, and then the round is not pushed from the magazine in the right angle, and typically they will simply get stuck on the top part of the chamber, causing a malfunction. So that was again a known issue at the time, and it was known to that extent that there was a directive that came directly from the ministry that the guns should leave the factory only with the very same magazine with which they were test fired, right? Because they wanted to make sure that the magazine works flawlessly in the gun. So if you get a gun with a different magazine, and if you have the failures to feed, just try to bend the feed lips slightly back, and that should resolve all of your issues with failures to feed. Also, another problem may be with the follower, which may have a little wobble. If it has more than just a little wobble, you may need to once again bend it so that it doesn't wobble inside the magazine, which also may cause problems. And obviously springs are a problem when they get too weak, but well, that was not a problem with my magazine. So always check your magazines if you decide to conceal carry CZ50. Make sure you have the feed lips exporting the round in the chamber under the correct angle. Then the gun is 100% reliable. So that's the biggest problem. One more thing that at the time was understood as a problem during the production of CZ50, and that's actually the only real improvement of CZ70. Yeah, there were improvements like the different texture of the disassembly button, different safety lever, and so on. But yeah, and the different grips. The materials were better. The grips were uglier, obviously. But one thing that was changed, and I've never ever seen it in any video mentioned, is a little leaf spring that was added to the pistol grip. I already mentioned that the material from which the pink extensions were made was very brittle, very prone to breaking, especially when dropped on the concrete floor or something. So one improvement that was made to prevent that, apart from changing the material structure, in case of CZ70, there was a little leaf spring that was inserted into the pistol grip, into the back part of the pistol grip. So in case of CZ50, if you release the magazine, yeah, it will fall out freely. In case of CZ70, it should only come out a tiny bit, and then you need to manually strip it out. Some of your CZ70 may still drop the magazine freely. That's because the spring may be worn out or even missing. One more problem you can have with your CZ50 is when your gun fails to keep the slide back after the last round was fired. Why this typically happens? Well, it is because the ejector is also a slide catch. So if you have the last round out of the gun, then the follower will raise this lever up, and that should keep your slide back. But if this pin gets worn out, then, or if you have a wobble here, extensive wobble, then what happens is that it will not stay like this. You see that the follower lifted the ejector, and that catches the slide. But what happens if you have this pin worn out, or if it moves freely in its channel, then the ejector and the slide catch will fall under the magazine follower. Then your slide will go back. Also, it may then block your magazine from being removed, so you have to strip it. So if you have these problems, just disassemble the gun, see if you have this pin in a good condition. It's just the simple pin that is keeping the ejector from one side, and you need to, if you have a problem with that, you need to just remove it, insert a new one in, and then flatten it on the other end. Let's focus on buying the gun. If you want to buy a gun, preferably go for the gun that is from Strakonice, so that one that says Národní podnik Strakonice and has 6-digit serial number. That's the first one, the first thing that I would really consider. Then if you find a gun like that, maybe it has the reddish slide still, that means it has the original finish from the factory. If you find a gun like this, then go ahead, disassemble the gun, and you need to check obviously the barrel, if the rifling is okay. You should check maybe the ejector, if it's firm in place, and but this can be fixed simply by typically changing the pin. But then an important thing to check, we already mentioned it, is the firing pin channel. On top, you should have little or no damage on top, no grooves, no flattened spots from the hammer. Another thing you should check on your gun is the fit of the hammer, especially if you push the hammer from right side to the left. There should be very little or no play. Yeah, it should be very, very tight. If it's not tight, that means that the place in the frame where the hammer is mounted could be broken. And if the hammer, as well as all the parts I mentioned previously, are okay, then you should be safe to buy the gun. I've prepared a short overview of production numbers of CZ70s, and as you can see from the table, most CZ70s were actually exported, and only a fraction of CZ70s ended in the services of the government, especially the Ministry of Internal Affairs that was controlling the police. But really, most of the guns were exported, which means that the quality was probably not all that bad. So guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit the subscribe button, like my videos. If you have any questions, remarks, whatever you would like to share with me, just write it down to the comment section. And until next time.